A crutch struck the marble floor. The sound cut clean through the great hall. Every noble at the long table turned. A girl in a torn gray dress hobbled toward the empty seats. One leg was gone below the knee. The cloth was pinned where the limb used to be. 3 lords laughed. A duchess raised her wine and turned away. 40 chairs sat empty, and not one was offered to her. She kept moving. She walked past the silver bowls, past the bleeding roast, past the duchess who hissed at her under her breath. Her name was Wren, the daughter of nobody important. She stopped only at the high dais at the far end. That was where the vampire king sat in black velvet. She looked up, lifted her chin, and spoke 4 small words. Why would a king answer her at all? Stay with me on this one. Wren came from a village called Hollowmere, half a day's ride south of the capital. Her father had been a farrier. Her mother had been a seamstress. Both were dead by the time Wren turned 9. After that, she lived above the smithy with her Uncle Bram, a man who drank too much and worked too little. She got her food by trading. She mended saddles. She cleaned the church floor. She combed the wool of 2 old ladies who paid her in eggs. She had grown up with both legs. That part matters. The leg was taken from her 3 winters ago, when she was 18, by a hunting accident that was not really an accident. A trap had snapped down on her shin in the woods behind Lord Merrick's hunting lodge. The trap had been set on a path she walked every day to gather firewood. The trap belonged to Lord Merrick himself. When the village healer cut the leg away below the knee, Wren had bitten down on a wooden spoon. She had not screamed. The healer said later he had never seen anyone so quiet under that kind of pain. He said it was either bravery or shock. Wren did not bother to tell him it was something else. It was a promise she had made to herself. She would not give the Lord the sound of her pain. He did not deserve it. After the leg, Wren learned how to move on a single crutch. She learned how to balance a milk pail on her hip while the crutch held her steady. She learned how to climb a ladder backwards. She learned how to ride a slow horse by leaning her body into the saddle differently than other people did. She did all of this without complaint and without asking for help. People in Hollowmere watched her and said she was strange. They meant it kindly. Some of them. Others meant it the other way. Lord Merrick had not paid her anything for the leg. He said the trap had been set for wolves. He said the path was his and she had been trespassing. He said any peasant girl walking through a lord's hunting woods was asking for trouble. The village elder had nodded along when the Lord said all of this. No one had argued out loud. Now here's the thing. Wren had not gone to the king's hall that night because she wanted to. She had been summoned. Every common-born subject of marriageable age in the southern provinces had been summoned. The vampire king had decreed it. Once every 50 years, he opened the great feast to the lower-born. He fed them. He let them sit at the table. And at the end of the night, he sometimes chose one of them for some purpose that nobody fully understood. The villagers said the king chose servant from these feasts. Other people said he chose food. Other people said worse things. Nobody really knew. The last time the feast had happened was before any living villager had been born. Wren had not wanted to go. She had no fine dress. She had no shoes that fit her remaining foot well enough to walk on stone for a whole night. She had no family who would brag about her if she came home. She did not want to be looked at or laughed at. But the king's summons was the king's summons. If she did not go, the village would be fined. If the village was fined, her uncle would be fined. If her uncle was fined, the bottle in his hand would turn into a fist on her cheek. So she went. She rode in the back of a turnip cart for 4 hours. She walked the last mile on her crutch. She arrived at the great hall in a dress he had stitched together from her mother's old curtains. Her hair was tied back with a piece of leather. Her face was clean. Her hands were shaking, although nobody saw that part. When she stepped through the doors, 3 guards looked at her, and one of them rolled his eyes. The other 2 did not even acknowledge her. She kept her chin up. She kept walking. The hall was the size of 3 barns laid end to end. The ceiling was painted with stars. At the far end on the high dais, the vampire king sat in a chair carved from black wood. He was not laughing. He was not smiling. He was watching the door. He had been watching the door for some time. "Believe me," the herald announced each guest as they came in, but he did not announce Wren. He had not been given her name. He looked at her, decided she did not matter, and said nothing. She walked past him without slowing down. The lower tables were already half full. Farmers in clean tunics. Bakers' daughters in borrowed lace. A blacksmith's son with a fresh cut on his lip. They all turned to look at her as she passed. A few of them nodded. Most of them did not. The upper tables closer to the dais were full of nobles. Dukes, earls, barons, the wives of dukes and earls and barons. They wore silver and gold and red velvet. They were drinking from glasses that cost more than Wren's house. And among them, near the middle of the upper table, sat Lord Marek. He had not expected her. She saw the recognition cross his face. She saw him glance at her crutch. She saw him glance at her stump. Then she saw him smile a thin, ugly smile, and turn to the woman beside him and whisper something that made the woman laugh. Wren walked toward the empty seats. The first seat she tried, an empty chair at the lower end of a long table, was claimed by a young man's coat the moment she reached it. The young man looked her in the eye and dropped his coat onto the seat. Then he sat on his coat. She moved to the next empty seat. A duchess hissed at her, "Try a different row." Wren tried a different row. The next empty seat was taken by a woman's fan. The next one after that was suddenly occupied by a knight who had been across the room a moment before and now refused to move. The next one after that was simply locked into the wall by a footman who slipped a wedge of wood under the chair leg and walked away. 40 empty seats stood in the hall. Not one of them was for her. She felt the heat rising up the back of her neck. She felt the eyes on her. She heard the laughs. She heard Lord Marek's voice, low but clear, saying, "Just sit on the floor, girl. The floor is where you belong." She did not sit on the floor. She looked once at the upper tables, twice at the lower ones, and then she did the only thing left to do. She walked toward the dais. She walked toward the only chair in the hall that was still empty. It was the chair beside the throne. A gasp ran through the hall. A few people stood up. A few sat down harder. Lord Marek rose halfway from his chair and then sank back. He did not want to draw attention. He had spent too many years making sure he was not the one who attracted royal eyes. Wren reached the dais. She climbed the 3 low steps, one at a time, the crutch knocking against the marble. The king was watching her. He had black hair tied back with a silver cord. His eyes were the color of cold iron. He had not eaten. The plate in front of him was empty. She stopped at the chair beside him. She did not bow. She did not curtsy. She did not know how to curtsy on one leg, and she would not try to learn it here. She lifted her chin. She looked at him directly. And she asked the question, "Can I sit here?" It was not a request. It was not a plea. It was a flat, plain, exhausted question from a girl who had nowhere else to sit. There was no please. There was no "my lord." There was nothing in her voice except the simple fact of it. The hall went so quiet that Wren could hear the candles burning. Lord Marek's face had gone the color of old milk. He was watching the king. Everyone in the hall was watching the king. The king did not move for a long moment. He looked at the chair beside him. He looked at her crutch. He looked at her empty cloth pant leg. He looked at her eyes. And then he stood up. He stood up slowly, the way a tall man stands when he does not want to startle a horse. He stepped down from the dais. He walked to her. He stopped a single step away. The whole hall was holding its breath. He reached out with one pale hand. He took the crutch out from under her arm. Wren felt her balance go. She felt her body tip. For one terrible second, she thought she was going to fall in front of the entire kingdom. But the king's other arm slid behind her back and caught her gentle, the way you would catch a falling cup. He did not lift her. He did not pick her up. He simply held her steady. He set her crutch carefully against the side of his own throne. He did not give it back to her. Then he did the thing nobody in the hall could have predicted. He guided her, one slow step at a time, around the chair beside the throne. And he sat her down on the throne itself. His chair. His own chair. The chair that no living person had ever touched. He did not sit. He stood beside her. He raised one hand to the hall and spoke 5 words. Tonight she sits with me. Lord Marek was no longer the color of old milk. He was the color of ash. He sat back down very, very slowly. The hall did not breathe. The candles burned on. The musicians were too frightened to play. A serving boy dropped a plate, and the sound rang out like a bell, and no one even turned to look at him. The king picked up a cup of wine from the high table. He held it out to Wren. He did not say anything. He simply held it out. She took the cup. She did not drink from it. She set it down on the arm of the throne, and she rested her hands in her lap, and she looked out at the hall the way a queen would look at a hall. For 3 long heartbeats, nothing else happened. The hall was quiet. The king was still. The candles burned. Lord Marek stared into his plate. The musicians slowly remembered how to play. A flute started up, soft and uncertain. A harp joined it. The feast was supposed to continue, so it began to continue. The serving boys carried out the next course. Wine was poured. The nobles ate, although their hands were unsteady. For a few moments, in that strange new silence, it almost seemed that the worst was over. It was not. A goblet shattered against the far wall. It had been thrown. Lord Marek stood at the upper table, breathing hard, his face twisted, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He had drunk too much, too fast, and his fear had turned into something uglier. He pointed across the hall at the throne. That girl is a cripple, he said. She is a peasant. She is a fraud. She has bewitched our king. She has used common village magic, and she has shamed this court. The hall went still again. The flute stopped. The harp stopped. Every eye turned to Marek. Now here's the thing. In the old laws of the kingdom, no noble was permitted to accuse a guest of witchcraft in the king's own hall. The penalty for a false accusation was death. The penalty for a true accusation, if witchcraft was proven, was also death, but for the accused. Lord Marek was either very brave or very drunk. Most likely the second. The king turned slowly toward him. The king did not speak. He looked at Marek the way a man looks at a stone he is about to overturn. Wren spoke first. She spoke quietly. She spoke from the throne. I have no magic, she said. I'm a girl from Hollowmere. My leg is gone. That is the truth of me. There is nothing else. The king nodded once. Then he turned to the hall and said, Lord Marek of Westhall, you have made an accusation. Under the old law, you must prove it. If you cannot, the accusation falls on you. Do you understand? Lord Marek understood. You could see it on his face. He understood, and he understood too late. He had spoken in anger. He had not thought. He tried to back down. Your Majesty, he said, I spoke too quickly. I withdraw. You cannot withdraw, the king said. The law is the law. There was a noise from the lower tables. A small, tight noise, like someone trying not to cheer. Wren did not look to see who had made it. She kept her eyes on Lord Marek. Bring me proof, the king said. Right now. In this hall. If she has bewitched me, you will be able to show how. Marek had no proof. He had nothing. He looked around the hall for help. He looked at the Duchess beside him. She would not meet his eyes. He looked at the Earl across from him. The Earl was suddenly very interested in his soup. Merrick was alone. He did the only thing he could do. He attacked. He drew the small ceremonial blade from his belt, the one that all nobles wore at feasts, the one that was supposed to be for cutting bread, and he flung himself toward the dais. He was not running at the king. He was running at Wren. This is where it turns. The king moved. He moved faster than anything in the hall had ever moved. He was not on the dais, and then he was on the dais, and then he was off it, and then he was in front of Merrick. He had not picked up a weapon. He did not need one. He simply set his open hand against the front of Merrick's shoulder. Merrick stopped as if he had run into a wall. The blade fell from Merrick's hand. It clanged against the floor. The king did not let go of his shoulder. "You came at her with a knife," the king said. His voice was very soft now. Softer than the candles. "In my hall. After lying about her." Lord Merrick's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The king did not kill him. Not then. He simply turned to his guards and said, "Hold him. Do not harm him yet. I want him to see what happens next." The guards came. They were not gentle, but they were not cruel either. They took Lord Merrick by both arms. They forced him to his knees on the marble in front of the dais. They held him there. The king turned back to Wren. He climbed the 3 steps. He did not sit. He stood beside the throne beside her, and he looked out at the hall. "There is something you should all know," he said. "The girl in this chair lost her leg 3 winters ago. It was taken from her by a trap set in a path she walked every day. The path led from her village to a forest where she gathered firewood. The trap was not set for wolves. It was set for her. The man who set it stands in front of me on his knees." Wren had not told the king any of this. She had not told him her name. She had not told him where she was from. She had not told him anything. And yet he knew. She turned and looked at him. He felt her look. He met her eyes. "I have been watching for you for a long time," he said very quietly so that only she could hear. "If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of this story. The next part is where everything turns." The king raised his voice again so the hall could hear. "Tonight," he said, "we end Lord Merrick's title. Tonight, every acre of Westhall returns to the crown. Tonight, his name is struck from the rolls." 3 of the lords in the hall gasped. 2 stood up. A woman cried out. Lord Merrick himself made a sound like an animal in a trap. "And tonight," the king said, "we hold a hearing. Right here. In this hall. About the night the trap was set." The hearing began at once. The king sat down on the throne, not the high throne with Wren on it, but a smaller carved chair the servants brought up to the dais. He took the place of judge. He called witnesses by name. The village elder of Hollowmere was in the hall. He had come to enjoy the king's wine, and now he was sweating into it. The king called him forward. The elder told the truth because he had to. The Lord had ordered the trap set on the path. The Lord had been angry with Wren because she had refused to be a chambermaid at the lodge. The Lord had wanted to teach her, in his words, a lesson. The elder had known. The whole village had known. They had stayed quiet because the Lord owned their land and their grain and their winter wood. A second witness was called. The healer who had cut away Wren's leg. He had ridden 3 days to be here. He had come on his own. He told the court that the trap had been a man trap, not a wolf trap. The teeth were too small for a wolf. The trigger was too light. It had been set for a person. He had seen the same trap, years before, used in a war that was best forgotten. A third witness was called. One of Merrick's own huntsmen, a young man named Pell. He had been bribed once by Merrick and beaten twice. He told the court that he had been the one ordered to set the trap. He had set it on the path that Wren walked every morning at sunrise. He had set it on a Tuesday. Wren had stepped on it on a Wednesday. He had been the one who heard her scream. He had been the one who had run, because Lord Marek had told him to run, to let her bleed, to let her die. Wren had not died. She had crawled half a mile on one leg to find her uncle. Her uncle, drunk as he was, had ridden for the healer. Lord Marek said nothing during this. He did not deny. He did not weep. He understood. He had already lost. When the witnesses were done, the king stood. He walked down from the dais. He walked to Lord Marek, who was still on his knees on the marble. He looked down at him for a long time. "You set a trap for a girl," he said. "You took her leg. You laughed at her tonight. You called her a witch in my hall. You drew a knife on her." Marek did not answer. "By the old law," the king said, "I could open your throat where you kneel. By the new law, I could send you to the iron mines for the rest of your life. By the law I am making right now, in this moment I am doing neither." There was a murmur in the hall. "Stand him up," the king said. The guards pulled Marek to his feet. "Take him to Hollowmere," the king said. "Take him to the smithy where her uncle works. Hand him to the village. Whatever they choose to do with him, that is the sentence. Whatever they choose. Whether it is mercy or whether it is not. I will not name his fate. The village will." The hall did not breathe. It was the worst kind of justice and the most fitting kind. The lord who had taken everything from a village would have his fate decided by that village. Some lords would have begged for the mines instead. Some would have begged for the throat. Lord Marek begged for nothing. He had nothing left in him to beg with. The guards led him away. The hall watched him go. When the door closed behind him, the hall let out a breath it had been holding for an hour. The king turned and walked back to the dais. He climbed the 3 steps. He stood in front of Wren. He went down on one knee. The hall gasped. A king does not kneel. A vampire king does not kneel. Not for a peasant. Not for a queen. Not for anyone. There was an old law about it, written into the foundation stone of the throne. A king who knelt would lose his crown to whoever he had knelt before. He knelt anyway. "Wren of Hollowmere," he said. His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "I have watched the southern provinces for many years. I have watched the people my nobles have hurt. I have seen what was done to you. I could not act on it without proof in this hall. Tonight I have my proof. Tonight I act." Wren looked at him. She did not know what to say. She had not been raised to say anything to a king. "I'm not asking you to forgive Marek," he said. "That is not in my power to ask. I am only asking you something else." He took her hand. He did not crush it. He did not kiss it. He simply held it. His skin was cold, the way old marble is cold. "Sit beside me," he said. "Not for tonight. Not for the feast. For as long as you choose." Wren did not answer right away. She looked at the hall. She looked at the empty seat where Lord Marek had been. She looked at the throne under her. She thought about the path through the woods. She thought about the morning she had stepped on the trap. She thought about her mother's curtain stitched into a dress. "For as long as I choose," she said quietly. "Not for as long as you choose." The king smiled. It was the first time anyone in the hall had ever seen him smile. "For as long as you choose," he said. "Those are your terms." "Then yes," she said. "I will sit." The musicians began to play again, not the loud feast music of the start of the night, but something softer. A song from the old border country. A song about a girl who walked through snow to find her brother. The hall ate. The hall drank. The hall whispered. Nobody whispered loud enough for the throne to hear. By the time the feast was done, the sky outside was beginning to turn. Not yet dawn. Just the first hint of gray. The king did not eat. He never ate at these feasts. He drank a single small cup of dark red wine, the same cup Wren had refused, and that was all. When the last noble had gone, when the lower tables had been emptied, when the servants had begun to clean the floors and gather the silver, the king turned to Wren. "You will have a wing of the castle," he said. A room, a garden, a door that locks from the inside, so that no one can come in unless you say. Servants if you want them. No servants if you do not. A horse if you want to ride. A teacher if you want to read. Anything else you ask for. Wren nodded slowly. I want one more thing, she said. Name it. My Uncle Bram, she said. He drinks too much. He hits me when he drinks. He is not a good man. I do not want him punished. I just want him moved. Find him a small house in a different village, far from Hollowmere, with a small allowance for ale. Let him drink himself out in peace, away from anyone he can hurt. The king looked at her for a long moment. You are kinder than I would be, he said. I am tired, she said. Kindness is cheaper than vengeance tonight. He nodded. Later, after the hall had emptied, after a quiet servant had brought a softer chair for her and a cup of warm broth, Wren and the king sat side by side on the dais. The hall was lit only by the candles that had not yet burned out. The painted stars on the ceiling were almost the only thing left of the feast. She asked him then what she had wanted to ask all night. Why me? He did not answer for a moment. I have lived a long time, he said. Too long. I have watched a great many girls come into this hall in pretty dresses and pretty shoes and pretty smiles. They come hoping I will choose them. They come knowing exactly what to say. They come carrying nothing of themselves, only what they think I will like. He turned to her. You walked in here on a crutch, in a dress your mother made into curtains, with a question that nobody in 1,500 years has dared to ask me. Can I sit here? Not may I marry you. Not will you save me. Not may I be your queen. Just can I sit here? As if my chair was a chair like any other. As if I was a man like any other. He paused. For one moment, he said, I forgot I was a king. For one moment I was simply a man, and a tired girl was asking me if she could rest. That has not happened in my life. So I gave you the chair. And then I gave you the throne. Because it turned out the throne was the only seat in the hall worth offering to someone who had walked that far on a crutch. Wren listened. She did not cry. She had spent her tears long ago, in a forest on a Wednesday morning with a trap closed on her shin. She had nothing left to cry for. I am not going to marry you tonight, she said. I am not asking you to. I am not going to promise you forever. I am not asking you for forever. I am only going to sit here. That is what I asked you for. That is all I asked you for. She nodded. Outside, somewhere very far away in the kingdom, a rooster crowed. Inside the hall, a single servant was sweeping the marble floor in long, slow strokes. The candles had burned down to stubs. The painted stars on the ceiling were fading as the real sky outside grew lighter. In a year, Wren would learn to read. In 2 years, she would ride a long-legged horse with a special saddle the king had made for her. In 3 years, she would sit on the throne for half of every council meeting, because the king said her judgment was better than his on questions that touched the lower-born. In 4 years, the southern provinces would have new laws, written by her hand, with the king's seal beneath her words. In 5 years, Hollowmere would be known as the village where the queen had been born. In 10 years, when the painted stars on the ceiling had been repainted twice, Wren would walk through the great hall on a fine carved leg the castle smith had built for her, and she would not need the crutch. But none of that had happened yet. None of that was hers yet. That night in the empty hall, she was still a tired girl in a stitched dress. The king was still a quiet man in black velvet. The throne under her was still warm from the candles. The night was almost over. She closed her eyes. She let her head rest against the high back of the chair. The king did not speak. He sat beside her and watched the door, the way he had been watching the door all evening, the way he had been watching every door for a very long time. The door stayed closed. The candles burned down. The night ended quietly. That was how the night ended. That was how the kingdom began to change. And that was how a girl in a torn gray dress, with one leg gone below the knee, walked into a hall full of laughter and walked out of it queen.